Good evening and welcome to the first event of Fall 2021. My name is Elizabeth Ivory and I'm the chair of Northumberland Learning Connection, or NLC as it's known. Before we begin this evening, we respectfully acknowledge that Northumberland County, where NLC is based, is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, the Huron-Wendat, the Iroquois, and the Ojibwe Chippewa peoples. This territory has been inhabited and cared for from the beginning by Indigenous peoples and is covered by the Williams Treaties. I'll now ask Barb Woolley to get us started with this evening's program.
Good evening. I'm Barb Woolley, and I'm an NLC board member. I'm delighted to introduce my friend and mentor, Roger Martin. And just so you know, Roger and I met in our 20s and collaborated on design and business thinking ever since. Roger's here to speak about his book, Overcoming When More is Not Better, Overcoming America's Obsession with Economic Efficiency, one of the top 10 business books of 2020. Roger is a Professor Emeritus at U of T and the former Dean of the Rotman School of Management. He's one of the world's preeminent scholars on business strategy, and in 2017 was named the #1 management thinker in the world by Thinkers 50. Roger grew up in Wallenstein, Ontario, which is near Elmira, one of 5 scary bright kids of a Mennonite heritage family, where the Martins established an agricultural feed business, which is thriving today. Roger was educated in a one-room schoolhouse alongside Malcolm Gladwell. There must have been something in that water. He then went on to Harvard to do his undergrad in economics and then received his MBA. Roger's extremely prodigious. Then a partner in a global strategy firm, he was recruited back to U of T and became one of the youngest deans ever there. And while dean, Roger introduced a new design-based pedagogy, increased Rotman's global rankings pretty massively, and took Rotman from the #4 place in Canada to #1. Roger's a trusted advisor to Fortune 100 companies like Ford, Lego, and Procter Gamble. And even with all of that, he's made time to write numerous articles for the Harvard Business Review, journals, newspapers, blogs, and no less than 12 books. And here's a little sidebar. As a board member and then chair, Roger led a team to engineer a new strategy for Tennis Canada. And despite a tiny budget compared to the other big tennis nations, the new program has produced players like Bianca, Felix, Chapeau, and Layla by hiring the best coaches and setting up the National Training Center in Montreal. As you can see, their winning ways are working. I'm also really happy to introduce Jameson Stevie and welcome him back to NLC as our moderator tonight. Jameson led our Zoom event in March with Peter Lowen, the pandemic pivot point. Jameson is the Chief Strategy Officer of the YMCA of Greater Toronto and the former Executive Director of the Institute for Competitiveness and Prosperity and the Martin Prosperity Institute, 2 policy think tanks and strategy think tanks at U of T. Jameson and Roger worked closely together, and I'm confident that his direct knowledge of Roger's work will make a rich discussion. We'll begin with a short talk by Roger and then turn things over to Jameson to continue the conversation. Please feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll be leaving time for audience participation. So Roger, over and out. Time for you to turn on your camera and mic.
Hi, the host needs to allow me to start my video. There we go. There we go. Perfect. Barb, thanks for the lovely introduction, and it has been a long, productive relationship with you and your wonderful firm and your wonderful partner, Bob. So thank you for that kind introduction. When more is not better, so I will attempt to share a screen here. This is a project that I started in 2013 and completed with the help of Jameson, who I'm looking forward to speaking with. That was based on my concern with the stagnation of middle incomes in America. For 200 years, from the inception of America as a freestanding country in 1776 to 1976, its bicentenary, the median income of American citizens had grown quite smartly over most of those 200 years, making the United States the richest country of any consequential size in the world. But it had slowed down since then. So the exploration was why? What is it about American democratic capitalism that caused this slowdown? Because it worried me that what made America such a prosperous country and an attractive country to become part of was this fact that if you were an average American, a median American, and you worked hard, you would move forward. If that had stopped, something very problematic would have happened to the American economy. So I wanted to explore that. And I've come to the conclusion that this is the result of a long march, in this case, a long march towards adoption of what I came to believe is an obsession with economic efficiency. So if you start in the top left, that's Adam Smith, 200 years prior to the bicentenary, the same year America became a country, wrote The Wealth of Nations, and in that described the division of labor as a means for making an operation more efficient. Then 41 years later, David Ricardo said you could be more efficient if you benefited from a comparative advantage. Countries should export the things that they had comparative advantage in and import the things that they lacked such advantage, and that would make them and their trading partner more efficient. Fast forward to Frederick Winslow Taylor in the bottom left, who pioneered scientific management in the early 20th century, and argued that if you use scientific principles, you could make operations more efficient, and was famous for his time and motion studies, where he'd go into factories and say, well, if you did this or that, you could be more efficient. Then finally, W. Edwards Deming, who after World War II, starting in Japan, introduced the world to the total quality movement, and showed how you could get rid of unnecessary waste by using the total quality principles he espoused. All of that was taken both to heart and to great extremes, extremes that I would argue that Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and W. Edwards Deming never imagined. With Frederick Winslow Taylor is another story. I think he wanted more efficiency always. But essentially, it got us to the point that by the bicentenary, that 1776 that I view as a bit of a marker divider, dividing line, the general view in the economy is more efficiency is always better. So if we just keep increasing the efficiency of the economy, things will be better. And how will things be better? Well, the notion is that the economic outcomes are in this sort of what's called a Gaussian distribution, a normal distribution, a bell curve, whichever you want to describe it as, where you will have a large and prosperous middle class, You'll have a tail of richer people and a tail of poorer people. And in such an economy, you will tax the richer to a greater extent to help the lives of the poor and help the poorer end of the tail of the distribution advance over time and have a fair chance in the economy. The theory was, if you kept increasing efficiency, that would happen then to that distribution. Everybody would move to the right, to higher levels of income. So the poor would become less poor, the rich would become richer, and the middle class would keep moving forward. And again, that happened. As far back as we could measure median income up till 1776, that was increasing at 2.4% real a year, which means it doubles every about generation. And so that was the success formula. But something happened after 1976. Something very dramatic happened. And this is what happened to incomes following that. This is the average income by percentile. So you'll see that top line, the jagged line, that's the top 0.01%. Then the next line's top 0.1%, top 1%, and bottom 90%. And what you can see is that pretty much from the peak in 1929, right before the Great Depression, all the way to the mid 70s, the top 0.01%, top 0.1%, top 1% actually was fairly stagnant in real dollars. And then something happened in the mid 70s. I mean, it's so clear that happened in the mid 70s, where it took off like a rocket. And the rich in America are getting richer than they ever have before, and it isn't even close. It's just almost disappearing off the scale. So rather than that curve moving smartly to the right for everyone, the tail of that curve was extending, and since 1976. The income growth, the real income growth of the median family has dropped from that 2.4% a year to 0.6% a year, a quarter the level, which means that it'll take almost 100 years for incomes of the median family to double. And why that's happened, or how that's happened, is this, and this is not my chart, this is a great chart from the New York Times columnist David Leonhardt, who showed what happened when essentially you had $1 of growth in the economy. Where did it go in 1980? That's the gray line. And in 1980, what happened, and its income percentiles are across the bottom. So in 1980, if there was $1 of growth, it was most likely to end up in the pockets of the lowest income people in America, lowest income families. And it had progressively downward so that it was least likely to end up in the pockets of the top 1%. And I would argue, I mean, I don't think it's being kind of socialist to particularly argue that that's the kind of a curve I like, right? It means that over time, the people who need income increases most are getting it with the natural growth of the economy. By 2014, a mere 24 years later, the curve is exactly the opposite. I mean, exactly the opposite, except a more exaggerated version, where the 99.999th percentile is going to get that growth. So essentially, what's happened is we've had a situation where instead of growth in the economy accruing in a way I'd argue most of us would like, it's accruing in a way that very few of us like. And the question is, how could that be? What has changed in that? And it turns out that there's a different kind of curve than this one, right? The Gaussian curve. There's a curve that was made famous by an Italian economist, political scientist, Wilfredo Pareto, who observed around the turn of the 20th century that 20% of Italian families owned 80% of the land. And this curve, in this curve, there are many incidences at the lower end. So if this is income and number of families, and there's a super long tail out to the right. And essentially, this is what's happening to the economy in my view. We are moving from the assumed Gaussian distribution, normal distribution, to a Pareto distribution of incomes. And that's been driven by this obsessive push for efficiency. And what the complexity theorists who study this say is that when you have, what turns a normal distribution into a Pareto distribution, it's increasing pressure on the system in question. And efficiency is a form of putting pressure on the system, and lower cost of connection between the items in the system. And as the world has gotten more and more connected, the internet, transportation cost, free trade, all of these things have connected things more together, put more pressure on the system. It's gone from Gaussian to Pareto. So this is not likely to go away. The trends we're seeing are not likely to ameliorate. There's no balancing factor here. And so what I say in the work in the book is this, that we've got the Amazon, right, on one side, and we've got Amazon, the corporation, on the other side. We are trying to produce Amazon, right, super hyper efficient things, when we should be thinking about the Amazon jungle, which is a complex adaptive system where we have to have balance as the goal, not an extreme of pressure for efficiency. And so we should be thinking, rather than of obsessing about efficiency where more is better, to say, actually, we need a balance between efficiency and resilience. That means we need balance between pressure and friction. Pressure is good, but only so much. Friction in some cases is good. Perfection and improvement, connectedness and separation. It's a balance between the two that we need to seek, and not this obsession with economic efficiency. And if we continue the obsession with economic efficiency, what I fear is that democratic capitalism will collapse, because the tricky thing about democracy and capitalism, right, is that democracy's got to work for 51% of the population, or they can vote capitalism out. That is what my fear is, that if we continue on our current path, the capitalist system that we know will disappear, and I'm not confident that we'll get something better. So I'd love to fix capitalism and make it work the way it worked prior to 1976. But with that, I will stop my comments, and I look forward to a conversation with Jameson and questions from all of you. So thank you very much. And Jameson, my friend, what's on your mind?
Coming on. Thank you, Roger. Do you want to stop sharing your screen, Roger, so I can?
Oh, good idea.
No worries.
There you go.
So, how are you doing? Great. Good to see you. Might as well. This is not a. This is a conversation between some two old friends, and looking forward to the questions from folks. As was said at the beginning, please just put them in the Q&A, and I will get to them in a little bit. We'll just start with a conversation with Roger and I. Roger, I guess I'd like to start with maybe exploring just on that last slide. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by friction? What are some of the frictions that could be inserted into the system to combat that notion of efficiency, which you're right, it's hard to think of it as anything but an unalloyed good. So what are some of the frictions?
Well, it would be things like having slack in systems. So when you say we need to take out all the slack in the system, let's say you're leading up to COVID and you say, we don't need all those emergency nurses, and we don't need all that PPE. We'd be more efficient without those things. Well, no, maybe having some slack in the system is a good idea, so that when things go up, you have some resilience in the face of those. Or antitrust laws. That's friction. That says corporations, even though you would like to, let's say, merge, maybe Bell and Rogers would like to merge, and they would be really happy if they would be allowed to merge, and maybe they would be more efficient in the short term by knocking a whole bunch of costs off. They'd fire thousands of people and be more efficient. We want to have a friction there, which is, no, you can't do that, because we'd like competition, which would be helpful for the customers in the long run, and they would benefit from us putting that governor, that speed bump in. So those would be examples of putting friction into a system.
Great examples, and I think competition law is obviously one of those areas over the next year. Feels like it's probably most ripe for change, because they're also looking at tests of power, which will be an interesting thing for them to do from a legal perspective, because efficiency has led to some omnipotent corporations.
No, I agree, and quite frankly, Jameson, this is one where this is much more administrative kind of things than the laws themselves. In my view, the antitrust laws on the books are actually fine. They're just the people administering them, and I blame the U.S. first on this, although Canada's gone along with it. There's now an efficiency defense for mergers. That was never contemplated in Sherman and Clayton, the landmark original antitrust laws in the United States. Nobody said, well, you can abuse your monopoly position and abuse customers and drive your competitors out of business unfairly, as long as you're efficient. No, that's not in. There's nothing in the Sherman Act that says that. That it says bad. We're not going to allow that, and we've somehow gone away from that. So I think in this case, there's a model already in place that we have to accept, and the efficiency defense for mergers is an abomination in my view.
Well, and it speaks to, I'm going to go to one of the questions Q&A, because I think you'd want to answer it. But it does speak to the notion that efficiency and economic thinking has really permeated all areas of public policy and legal thinking, not just on the economic side. But the question here, Roger, is efficiency and growth are two sides of the same coin. You've talked about fixing capitalism to make it sustainable for the future, but how can a system based on the need for continuous growth ever be sustainable? I saw that in the Q&A and thought you might want to speak to it before we move to some of the other issues.
Sure. So, I mean, again, I do think that the greatest force for growth is human ingenuity. It's actually productivity gains, and productivity gains are greatest when you are innovative. So I think the methodology for getting growth of let's focus entirely on sort of narrow measures of efficiency, I think are actually harming growth. In fact, and we talk, as you know, in the book about the great Costco, the great chain that has been faster growing, more profitable than its competitors by doing a whole bunch of things that everybody looking at it from the outside would say, well, that's inefficient. That's inefficient. That's inefficient. Why are you paying your people so much? Why are you putting slack into the system? Why are you spending so much money on cross training? All you are inefficient. Well, you are, unless your sales per square foot are vastly ahead of anybody else's, because customers love you, employees love you, everybody loves you. So I do think, to the question though, I think there is an obsession with more growth is also better. Like whenever you have these rules that sort of like
when more is not better,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. You know the drill. So there are companies in my view that for example shouldn't be trying to grow. They've grown as much as they can grow, and they should manage themselves well without much growth. Other companies should grow, but the main point of it is balance. It's thinking about efficiency and thinking about resilience. That'll that'll provide enough growth, and growth of the sort that we'll look back on and say, I'm glad we had that growth, rather than, oh my God, what did we sacrifice of humanity to get that growth?
One of the animating thoughts to your writing this book, I recall, and it's one of the things I'm proud of as I read it, was you and I noted many books have been written on this, and then they usually get to their final chapter on solutions, and the final chapter is something like try harder, be kinder. So you focused a lot of your time on solutions in this book. Perhaps you can speak a little bit to individual citizens.
Sure.
I think I want to turn also to what governments can do in the public sector as well. But maybe you can start there, because sometimes in the face of big notions like democratic capitalism and efficiency, individual citizens feel a little bit powerless, and maybe more so now than ever before. So wondering what are some of the things that you advocate for in the book?
Well, you're certainly right, and for those on the call, one of the great things about Jameson as a thinking partner here is Jameson's background really drove him to think a lot about the question of citizens and what's the role of citizens, which is very, very helpful to the cause. Number one, I think it's utilizing their purchasing power. I mean, I am flabbergasted sometimes the degree to which people say, I really care about this, and then they buy stuff that is kind of directly in contradiction to that. And I've always believed that we would get work on sustainability and work on equity and inclusion, and when consumers start to vote to a greater extent with their pocketbook, as well as at the polling station. So I would say we have to ramp that up. The other thing is again collective action. This is old fashioned, but there are great, and we have examples of the book, the boycott in ketchup to sort of punish Heinz for closing down it's stopping purchasing tomatoes in Canada and moving its manufacturing to the US. I mean, if citizens do want a better planet, I think they're going to have to take greater action, and we've gotten to a point, right, where I think we have far too ingrained political parties. It's worse in the United States than Canada. I really think that 3 parties is a lot better than 2. I really do. Now maybe 15 or something like this in Israel or Italy is too many, but citizens are just going to have to stand up to the entrenched parties to a greater extent, because there are some things that the parties just say, that's too hard to do, and we're going to do other stuff, and citizens have to say, well, then we'll take action ourselves, because there's lots of action to be taken.
Well, that's helpful. You're mentioning of our 3 political parties, although in this last 30 days up here, Roger, it's felt like there's been more like 6 or 7 of them. But
really? Okay, I've been out of the country. I didn't.
Yes, well,
it's
always good to be
all.
out of the country. It's good to be out of the country when there's an election going on, no matter what country it is. Just you got to get into the vote. That's the most important. But we've obviously landed with a minority parliament, and one of the aspects of your book talks about some of the things governments can think about. And I reread that chapter today in light of, I think, what a lot of people hope for in minority governments, of parties working together better. And you have some, I think, really creative suggestions as to what sort of the public sector can do, or what the governments can do to be a little more nimble, for lack of a better word, with some of their thinking. Perhaps you can speak to 1 or 2 of those.
Sure.
As well.
Yeah. So one of the things is, one of the themes of the book is that the economy is not a machine. You can't analyze it and figure out how to make it work perfectly. It's a complex adaptive system like the Amazon. You can't go to the Amazon and say, oh, let's try to make the Amazon work perfectly. It works in a complex and mysterious ways. And I think governments, to too great an extent, spend their time trying to get stuff perfect. right? And so they fight and fight and fight and fight. And again, this is probably more the case in the U.S. Than not, where bills take forever to fight about because it's got to be perfect. And then of course they're all wrong, right? They're just not right. And Canada has got this magnificent example, the Bank Act. For those who are less familiar with the U.S., our Bank Act is equal in strength and power to about 25 kind of legislations in the US. It's all fragmented, so it's gigantic and important and central to Canada. Well, when it was put in place 4 years after Confederation, the framers wisely said there has to be a mandatory review and revision to the Bank Act every 10 years. Brilliant, just absolutely brilliant. And I think that was an understanding that, gee, how the banking sector evolves, who the heck knows? Nobody. Let's make sure we make the legislation automatically kind of renewed. And interestingly enough, that was shrunk to 5 years in the 90s, right? So it's not a political thing. It's 5 years, and you got to review it. Whoever's in power. I would do that for every piece of legislation. Make every piece of legislation required for mandatory review and revision. That way we wouldn't have politicians promising we'll do this thing and it'll all be fixed, and then the electorate says it's 2 or 3 years later, well, you didn't fix it, so then they're all disappointed in government. It's government's fault in the sense that they overpromised, not the government's fault because they didn't do a great job, because you can't do a great job. So if I could only do one thing with governments, it would be is recognize that you have to try stuff and tweak it and tweak it and tweak it and tweak it, rather than put stuff in place and then defend it for time immemorial.
Well, that's a great example. And if I can add on, I had the pleasure, after we wrapped up, to go work with another think tank at U of T that focused on emerging technologies.
Yeah.
And it's even worse in that space, in that you have an information deficit often within the public service. And then the thing you're trying to regulate moves faster than government ever could.
Yeah.
And so they by the time they've written their legislation, they are well past the point of being able to regulate it. So,
and you feel this sense of embarrassment. Oh, I've got it
Yes.
wrong, and we've got it. I'd say don't be embarrassed. Just don't overpromise. And I would say to the electorate too, don't ask them to overpromise. Right? You're just setting yourself up as the electorate for failure. Let's elect the people who promise us the most perfection. No, you're going to be disappointed. We should elect the people who promise us to be most diligent in tweaking whatever they do. Tweak. That is what you do. If you're going to mess with the Amazon, right? You don't go in there and start. Well, actually, people do clear cut. Hundreds or millions of acres. No, you say, let's try this little thing and see how it works. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to tweak rather than seeking perfection. Seek improvement.
Well, and I think, in our hopeful times, you think back to Bill Davis minority governments, or David Peterson working with Bob Rae. There was a time when minority governments were celebrated as being able to be more iterative, more creative. So here's hoping that some of that rubs off in this generation. But
yeah, why did it change? Why did it change? Jameson, you're a better student of politics than I am. No, you are.
Yeah.
What changed? When did it change? Did it?
I think a lot of it has to do with the increasingly combative nature of politics. And I think, we've talked about this previously, the ability to take someone down has actually become more valued than the ability to build something up. And I think in minority governments, much of it has become weaponized, whether it's because things are on TV more. You can use committees rather than discussing an idea to attack people. I think that's a large part of it. And campaigns have become more brutal. And so it's harder after the end of that period to turn to the people who you've been attacking. There's a line from a former politician I worked with who said, "We're also worried about taking the hill, and no one's worried about the hill." and it's a wise thing. So here's, I'm hopeful that they're all exhausted from this campaign and don't want to go back to a campaign anytime soon, so they find ways to work together. But I remain optimistic, if not naive. So
Yeah, no, I have a thesis that I've been thinking more and more about on this, and I'll just run it by you because you're as I say, you're more experienced in this. I feel that one thing has happened is that politicians have gotten more certain. Right? There's this talk about polarization, and to a certain extent, you could call it polarization. I call it the rise of certainty, where it felt to me as though in those olden days, to a greater extent, a Bill Davis minority government, it's like, I think this would be a good idea. Let's try it, as opposed to, I'm sure I'm right. I'm sure those people are wrong. So I must fight absolutely for exactly what I think because I'm right and they're wrong. So we sort of have this rise of to me, a rise of certainty that is causing people to say, because I'm right, I am going to create the perfect answer and stick with that. And that's this pursuit of belief in perfection, that you can figure it out. It's not a complex adapter system. Oh, no, it's a perfectible machine. I know the answer and I must fight the others because I'm right and they're wrong. And so it's my duty to fight them to the death. I don't know.
And I would agree. And I would add on, and it is a loss for me if I agree with you.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
In fact, it's sort of immoral. It's immoral
yes.
because I'm agreeing with the wrong, what I know absolutely is the wrong answer.
It's a breach of the tribe. And like you think about Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan amending social assistance in the United States versus the infrastructure bill that just came through in the United States is described as bipartisan. I would argue it is 6 things from the red team and 6 things from the blue team put into the same legislation, which I would argue is not bipartisan. But But with that, that's a good transition. One of the first questions we had was, isn't this phenomenon of efficiency due to Reaganomics and the idea that the economy, quote, fixes itself? How much of this do you think either exacerbated that or caused that, or do you think it's a separate phenomenon altogether?
I mean, I think Reaganomics was more an effect than a cause. To be honest, I mean, I think it played an important role. That was an important decade, but every marker that I can find of this happened before then. It was the 70s. It was during the 70s that everything changed. Now you could say, well, and that at the end of the 70s that was reflected in Reagan. But the timing just doesn't work for that thesis because it wouldn't have started before that. Why was there a precipitous slope in that income curve starting in 1975? Nobody even thought Ron Reagan had a shot at that point. It was the 76 convention where he made the speech that people said, oh, well, maybe this guy could be president. So now, an interesting thing too is people will talk about kind of Reaganomics as if it was a Republican thing. And as I point out in the book, as you know, both of his tax bills were passed to a greater extent by Democrats than Republicans. So there was, I would argue, there was something in the water starting in the 70s that where perceptions shifted, and there was a belief. I mean, the Washington Consensus is littered with odes to efficiency. It's a love letter to efficiency. I don't think of the Washington Consensus as a particularly right-wing kind of thing. It's sort of a globalist kind of thing. The right wing would say, "Oh, it's yes." Once again, these left-wing globalists. I think it's somewhere more centrist than that. So as I say, I think it was not a cause; it was an effect of something in the water at that time that moved in that direction.
One of the questions is, what changes would you make to, quote, balance Amazon? So I guess this gets at some of our competition law questions, but are there specific things there that you would address?
Well, I would go go after them with antitrust and get to search their documents and learn all about their kill zone philosophy. And same with Facebook and Google, right? That they establish a kill zone where any company that comes into the kill zone, they kill. I think Sherman had something to say about that kind of predatory behavior. It's just, it's just like they're just all the tech giants are just behaving badly. Full stop. There is nothing that John D. Rockefeller did, who, by the way, blew up competitors' oil refineries, kind of threatened them physically and whatever. He had nothing on the big tech. It was just brass knuckles, bare knuckles, kind of fighting, and the American citizenry said, we don't really like this. So I literally would, and it's behavior that I think is just not acceptable. And again, it's not like I super dislike these people. It's just the environment has been the means. The end justifies the means, and the end is total domination. And so any means is okay. Oh.
Well, and it's interesting. A follow up, not from the Q&A, but as you know, I'm a big podcast listener, and Ezra Klein did a piece on this, and his fear, and you would appreciate this, if you're going to change the status quo, you have to appreciate the status quo. Yeah. And one of his criticisms of Democrats in the United States is they try to hate Amazon as a company. And he would say, there are many people who really like Amazon. The efficiency has delivered them goods to their door for 18 months during a pandemic. I guess my question is, do you think there's a chance, if there is ever a post-pandemic, that people will return more to my hometown, St. Catharines, yours, Wallenstein, type of retail experiences and consumer experiences of wanting that human touch with, is that something that the market might decide, or do you think it's not going to be enough, and some of those places will just get wiped out during this period?
Yeah, I don't think it's coming back. No, I do think we evolve, and there is creative destruction that happens in economies, and it's sad for people. This is why safety nets are important in economies, because it is for the greater good that we move forward economically on various fronts. But you can't do that without caring about the people who are left behind. And again, I would agree on Amazon entirely. I think the tech giants have brought great things to the world. It's just they've been allowed to behave very, very badly, and it's hard. It's hard when you've got the efficiency defense sitting there for them to say, well, on the books, there's a rule that says, I can do X. And for them to say, despite that fact, I'm going to ignore that and not do it. It's sort of like it's hard to play half hard when you're one of these companies. So you just have to have a as carefully thought out and ever tweaked set of rules to guide their behavior in a way that is good for society. And I am very worried in some tech spaces the kill zone philosophy is going to destroy innovation that would happen from little companies.
And with that, Roger, maybe one of the questions in the Q&A, and it's a twist to the positive. So yes. What is a good example of a huge company doing it right? I mean, you mentioned Costco. Are there others that you think could be used as exemplars of for proper growth or proper distribution?
Sure. I mean, I think. Well, I mean, I do love Costco because I mean, the sort of commitment to paying a salary that will cause their workers to be able to come to work every day, not worrying about food and shelter for their kids, and caring about them being able to send their kids to university. So I like Costco. I mean, I'm a big fan, and he's a friend of mine, of Paul Pullman, for the long time CEO of Unilever. He stepped down now, but I mean, he basically showed that you don't have to accept as a CEO things that other CEOs accept, right? So when he took over, he said, "I'm going to invest long term for consumers and brands, and I'm going to invest in sustainability because I think it's the right thing to do, and I think consumers are going to care about it." And you know, many people said, "Well, the capital markets will never let you do that." And so Paul said, "Well, the capital markets aren't this sort of like this sort of kind of one unified thing. It's a whole bunch of investors. I've got to get a bunch of investors who care about sustainability. So I'm going to go around the world and find them, and I'm going to tell my existing investors, if they don't like it, get out of the stock," which scared the living daylights out of a lot of people around Unilever, but he did it. Though he did say, "I did it in my first few months there because I knew they couldn't fire me in the first few months." But within 2 or 3 years, his share register was completely different. It was a lot more pension funds, long-term holding funds, and so many CEOs say, with my shareholders, I can't do that, and never have the second foot drop and say, "Well, maybe I got to get different shareholders." Paul Pullman showed that for one of the world's, you know, really gigantic with a broad investment base companies, you can do it. It's hard work, but you can do it. And so I think I like Costco because it says you can pay people like 50% more than minimum wage in a minimum wage industry and do better than everybody else. I like Pullman and Unilever that says you don't have to be kowtow to shareholders. You can, if it's the right thing to do, you can figure out how to do it. And I would say any CEO has more latitude than it is generally viewed that they have. I do not feel quite as sorry for CEOs. It's a tough job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but I don't feel quite as kind of sorry for their state in life as many do.
Well, and another company that I always was inspired when you talked about them was Lego.
Yeah.
As you can tell by the art in the background, I have an audience of Lego. But you talked previously to me before about sort of the European model of ownership of some of these companies as well, and sort of the nature of the public trust. Could you maybe talk to that point as well?
Sure.
To educate the audience?
Sure. Well, I mean, I one of the things I love about Europe is there are many more private companies. Lego is an example of it. In fact, in Denmark, virtually any big Danish company that you could name, Novo Nordisk, Novozymes, Lego, Grundfos, Danfoss, Danske Bank, all of the big ones are owned in part by a foundation, a charitable foundation. Lego's owned 25% by a charitable foundation that gets 25% of the dividends every year, and then goes and tries to help the world be a better place through giving children the opportunity to play, among other things. That's their main thing. So having that sense that we have this purpose that is beyond the corporation, and that if we do well, and Lego does very well, and so every year the Lego Foundation has more kind of money to spend. I love that kind of ethos, and also, you know, nasty hedge funds, activist hedge funds, can't come along and threaten to take
Right.
over Lego, because the foundation has essentially the proverbial golden share, and they'll just tell them to pound sand. We ain't selling to you jerks. And I like that as well. I do think that the capital markets, the public capital markets, have got to get smarter, because there's a lot of stupidity in the public capital markets, or that they will lose the competition with private capital. They are losing. There are fewer and fewer public companies, more and more money in the private sector or private company hands. I don't love that completely, because I like the sunlight that's shone on by public shareholding and the disclosure that's required there. That I all like, but modern shareholders have got to behave, and there's too much misbehavior in that market.
Well, and I've often thought there's a political corollary there to public life, which is it would be wonderful to hear someone campaign just on behalf of kids and grandkids, right? Like the decisions I'm going to make, the policies I'm bringing forward aren't for the here and now. They are for 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And there might be some immediate pain versus the attraction, as you said about promises, is to do something for someone immediately, to make them feel good today, to make them feel good in their pocketbook. I think if you called on people to vote for their better angels, you'd have a shot, I think.
Yeah.
But maybe.
But has anybody tried that? That's the interesting. And see, I agree with you, and I think these things are not undoable. So if I were a betting man, I'd bet that somebody could do what you've described. But I haven't. Has anybody tried?
I don't know in a pure way. I mean, I think in an aspirational way, some folks have, but in a policy way, not really, because the attraction to appeal to the pig and the python, which is the largest voting bloc, which has been baby boomers for a long time.
Yeah.
Millennials are catching up, so we'll see if there's a change on that front. So, one other question that was coming through, and it's a bit of a complex one, but our area of the province, Northumberland, has achieved the goal of negative growth over 3 decades due to the exodus of manufacturing. The result is that 8 of the top 10 employers in the region are now government or government agencies: teachers, healthcare, county, town, etc. These groups have no downward wage trending other than in comparison with the top 1%. Does the growth of the public sector mean the economic indicators might be worse than we think? Wages, etc.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I guess I would be, if I were running Northumberland County, I would be trying to say, well, what in the private sector could we be good at? And I would be, even if it's a hard, long build, I would be trying to build back up, because it's not government jobs are good jobs. Or many high, require high education and good salary levels, blah blah blah, but bunch of stuff. And not that they're bad, but and we were doing this project that we never got finished, Jameson, about what kind of groups of clusters as necessary, sort of the minimum amount of dispersion of industries makes for the optimal city. We never got that. Done. But in my heart of hearts, I believe that a jurisdiction is more resilient, more vibrant if it has requisite variety. And what you described didn't sound too much like requisite variety to me.
Right. I'll ask one more question and then I'll turn it back to the NLC folks. What gives you most reason for optimism in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years from an economic perspective? Is there something we should keep an eye on that gives you hope? One or more items that you think that's a light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I guess I think the societal interest in equity and inclusion combined with sustainability, and those two things are kind of are linked. To me, it's hard to think anything but positively about that. It's sort of like these things that are tough. They're there. I mean, how to get equity, how to make sure you've got diversity, inclusion. Easy? Heck no. Hard stuff. hard stuff to figure out how. Sustainability, is that easy? No. But the fact that it seems as though people are saying, I know they're hard, but it's the right thing to do, that I guess I think that view was not a predominant prevailing view. I mean, yes, we've had the civil rights movement, and it's not like there's been nothing there, but in terms of the overall gestalt of how many people would say, yeah, we got to do something on those. So that gives me hope for optimism. Those are good things.
Well, and I would add on top of that COVID, at least in our country, has really exposed a lot of those inequities, a lot of those inefficiencies, when speaking about them in an economic way didn't resonate. But when you look at the heat map of where this virus has spread fastest and hardest, it's at the Amazon factory in Brampton. It's at the lower end of the economic scale, and all you have to do is talk to. I have the pleasure of teaching public policy students, and they are angry and want to help, and that's a nice combination. So
and this sort of kind of cynical kind of corporate thing of hey, we declared you essential so that you could keep the economy going, but now we're going to take away the bonuses we gave you, or all of those things. It's like, hold it, time out. Like, were we essential or not here? Oh, let me get it right. We were essential when you were desperate, and we're not essential now that you're happy. I mean, some of those things, I think you're right. One thing that COVID has done is exposed both those physical, real, kind of terrible things that you're talking about, the disproportionate impact on poor, but also exposed kind of just bad logic, indefensible logic, and those are good things.
I'm being encouraged. I'm being told I get a little bit more time, so I'm going to ask one more from the chat. It's a great talk. Thank you. Appealing to people to make decisions for the greater good is noble. For example, asking people to not use plastic or reduce gas consumption. But as you know, it only goes so far. The reality is that many people react to market signals, hence the putting of price on carbon. Can you talk a little bit more about the tension between not being obsessed by efficiency and the pressure of regular people responding to price signals?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I think, as in most things, you're going to be rolling your eyes on this one. I'm sort of a both guy, you know that, and I'd say I do want people to care more and decide to do things, but I don't mind at all there being appropriate price signals. Like my general view just is that to the extent possible, people should be facing kind of realistic prices, right, and if there truly is a price to society of carbon, why shouldn't it be incorporated in the goods and services they buy? That having been said, I would want people to not only be motivated by putting some kind of tax on plastic, let's just say for sake of argument, that's their only motivation. I would want people as citizens to be saying, and I'm going to sacrifice a little bit to use something that maybe costs a little bit more, or its physical characteristics aren't exactly as good for the use, but it's better for the environment. I don't think those have to be in opposition to one another. I think they can be complementary to one another, and basically the long and short of it is I want people to care and take responsibility for caring. Who do I want to take most responsibility for caring? People who are more well endowed. There's no question. If the last 5 or 10 cents you spend at the grocery store to feed your family mean everything, I am not going to ask you to buy kind of kind of method cleaning products because they're good for the environment. Sorry,
Right.
I'm not. And also you don't help them by putting a huge tax on those either. So I think, you know, those who have more have to contribute more. I think take the lead, create demand, right? Like I would rather see people with more disposable income creating demand, that base level demand for things that get the costs of products down because you're producing them at greater scale. But it's a little bit of both, as always.
Well, that's a great answer to close on, and it allows me to say, you know, as happy and proud as I was of you to be ranked #1 business thinker in the world, I found it limiting because you are probably one of the finest public servants I ever met. Because of your service to the public. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time. Thanks for letting me be a part of it. Hoyer's hoping someday soon it's not in tiny little squares when we can talk again. So
yeah, that it would be nice to shake your hand or give you a hug, my friend. But thank you for doing this. When our friends from NLC said, "Oh, Jameson's going to be your interlocutor," I said, "Hurrah!" And that's a nice excuse.
Great. Well, thank you. I'll turn it back to the NLC people. And do you want us to turn off our cameras for you now, or?
Sure, you can do that, or you can stay up for a second while I
I'll
thank
stay
you.
up.
I just wanted to
I'll
say
just mute.
say thank you, and we enjoyed it so much. It was fascinating, that graph showing how things changed in 1976, which is an ancient history to a lot of us tonight, was just fascinating. It's something I will look at more in the book when I get my hands on it. Also, thank you for making us feel a little bit better about our minority government, because, you know, here we are again. I guess there are some things that we should be thankful for. It was a wonderful discussion. Really appreciate you both coming to NLC tonight, and I know the Northumberland audience really appreciated it. So thank you, gentlemen, and good night. And the rest of you, the audience, thank you for joining us, and please take 30 seconds when we close the webinar to answer our survey. And who knows, you might even win a copy of Roger's book. Thank you, everyone, and good night. We'll see you again October 21st with Terry O'Reilly. Good night, everyone.